indefinite period of time, said Assistant Treasury Secretary Tim Masad. He oversees the $700 billion Troubled Asset Relief Program. Moving to exit our investment in GM within the next 12 to 15 months is consistent with our dual goals of winding down TARP as soon as practicable and protecting taxpayer interests. Let me see if I can explain this protecting taxpayer interests. We have lost our shirt and we want to get out before we lose any more. That's just my interpretation. Your mileage may vary. Interestingly enough, the Treasury has also agreed to waive its ban on GM using corporate aircraft. Now, that I find to be interesting because those evil executives who were using corporate aircraft now somehow they're no longer evil. We're going to allow GM to do that. Why would we do that? It was a condition that was imposed on a few companies that got large bailouts back in 2008 and 2009. But now, why did we do that? If other companies are doing that in the private sector, in the non-government owned sector, is it perhaps that there might actually be a valid business reason for corporate aircraft? But even though the ban on using corporate aircraft may get lifted, the government pay restrictions on top executives will remain in force. And those things limit GM executives to no more than $500,000, that's $500,000 a year, in cash salaries. It's a very interesting perspective when one considers that we're only losing 50% on something that we were supposedly already paid back. On the other side of this brief little thing, I want to pick up on the unserious negotiations going on around the fiscal cliff. But first, take a listen to Bill Whittle and his commentary from Afterburner. Stay tuned.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Afterburner. I'm Bill Whittle. You know, I've been watching the Washington kabuki since the election, and I find that things I used to feel were critical to the future of the country, you know, things like out-of-control spending and voter fraud and debt default and foreign policy fiascos and all the rest of the clown car antics in the goat rodeo called Washington, D.C. Well, none of these things seem to matter to me anymore. Do you feel the same way? Watching these same drones that ruin this country's finances, pretending to go through the motions of trying to save it when not one person in this country, not one person, has any hope, desperate or cynical or otherwise, that this will in fact happen? Do you feel that same emotional disconnect as I do? President Obama has proven so far what I and many others long suspected and was evidenced in his printing of a last-minute picture book children's pamphlet a few days before the election, and that is, namely, he doesn't give one single hot damn about what he'll try to accomplish in his second term. The re-election was about his narcissism, and that alone. In fact, when the history of our time is written, they'll probably call it the age of the unserious, a time of approaching fiscal disaster courageously led by a man on perennial vacation, this time back in Hawaii, where he spent his dope-smoking slacker life of leisure, while most of us serious people were out working to bank the money that he and the rest of these unserious people have just spent. Now, he'll be joined in this ongoing national comedy act by Harry Reid, a low-grade intellect with lower morals who has somehow mysteriously managed to become worth millions of dollars. Isn't that interesting? Harry Reid and his Democratic Senate have violated their oaths to the Constitution by simply flat-out refusing to fulfill their primary duty, passing a budget that the president and the rest of these criminals can then go on to ignore. In any other organization, they would have been fired for malfeasance of duty. In a healthy America, they would have been tried for treason, fined $1, and then fired for malfeasance of duty. The House of Representatives remains in the hands of Republicans, which is convenient for the unserious people in the Democratic Party's audiovisual department, otherwise known as the news media, since their attempts to stop this catastrophe can be conveniently blamed as the source of, rather than the attempt to prevent, the monumental collapse that's coming. Oh, and just so we're all clear on the fact that not all of this blame lies on one side of the aisle, does anyone out there know what John Boehner really believes? Is there anything he's able to articulate? Can the Speaker of the House of Representatives make the simple case for why all of these liberal taxes, regulations, and spending are the death of everything we hold dear? No, apparently not. The most prominent Republican in the government hasn't got the slightest idea of what the idea of limited government means, how to sell it, or how to defend it. These are not serious people. And so, what is left? Well, the giant vault of gold coins that Scrooge McDuck used to swim in, that would be the national treasury, a stockpile of wealth that took 200 years to accumulate, is, well, it's empty now. These miserable, unserious, criminally negligent, incompetent, immoral, reprehensible, traitorous swine have spent every last gold coin in those former mountains of wealth. That didn't stop them, of course. Then they started spending all the gold coins your children will make. But that wasn't enough for them either, not these addicts. Hey, you know how much cocaine a coke addict will do? All of it. So they spent the gold coins that your grandchildren will work their entire lives to make, and you'd think that'd be enough for these junkies, but you'd be wrong, because Obama, Reid, and, let's be honest, the rhinos in the establishment GOP have also spent, not will spend, but have already spent, all of the mountains of gold coins lent to us from workers around the world, and now we're running on spending the money of their children. No, this is not a government. This is a tumor. My friend Jeremy Boring likes to point out that the government of what was once the freest country in the world costs more money to run than the entire GDP of the number 2 economy in the world, that'd be communist China, and their 1.3 billion state-controlled slaves. And most of this is in entitlements, by the way. You could pay for the actual government, that'd be park rangers, government buildings, the Department of Education, the entire U.S. military, all of it, and do it at a reduced tax rate, less than what we're paying now. But if you destroyed the entire government, burned every building, fired every government worker, sank every aircraft carrier, even with no government to pay for, none, we'd still pay the same taxes that we're paying today and still have to borrow or print money just to pay for entitlements. Unserious people, people in what my friend Evan Sayed calls the rhetorical industries, that'd be academics, organizers, reporters, and movie stars, people who pay no real-world price for being wrong, have spent all the money in the world, and they are killing the means for making that money again next time around. They don't care. They have their golf games and their $4 million vacations and mysterious bank accounts and their vacations in Spanish villas. And all that is left now, all that remains, is some unknown number of serious people who do not have a prayer for the future as long as we continue to tolerate these liars, idiots, thieves, and incompetents who have stolen from us in our own name. And if we don't recruit an army of serious people in the next 2 years, an army, and I don't care what party they align with, so long as they're serious people, then these liars, idiots, thieves, and incompetents will sink us all. And we'll have no one to blame but them. Them and the unserious idiots that sent them there in the first place. And those would be us.
I love sarcasm delivered with a baseball bat. That was Bill Whittle and Afterburner. And he makes really a number of outstanding points, but two that leap to my mind. The fact that we spend more on our government, our federal government, federal, state, and local government, than the entire gross domestic product of China, which supports 1.3 billion people. There's only 315 to 320 million people in the United States. 1.3 billion people. Their entire gross domestic product. We spend more on our government. That is just staggering, and allow that to sink in. But the other point that jumps out to me is the fact that the unserious nature with which we are governing this country. If you look at the proposals that are being bantered back and forth between the White House and John Boehner, and I'd say the White House and Congress, but this really isn't what's happening. What's happening is we have what, in my view, is the equivalent of a fight during recess on the playground, with two of the kids standing there in the sandbox trying to size up whose is bigger. And fact of the matter is, neither of them knows why they're fighting. Neither one knows why they're mad, and neither one knows how to do anything other than to basically sneer at one another. But never truly accomplish anything to try and diffuse the problem. Speaker Boehner is, in my view, not providing leadership in this situation. He's too focused on the politics and the optics of the situation to do the principled thing and do what's right for America. And this president, make no mistake about it, is only concerned with one thing and one thing only, and that is to destroy the Republican Party so that he can continue to finish implementing his ideology, which, in order to do so, he needs to eliminate the Republican Party. So he's going to do everything that he can to tie, like an albatross around the neck, this quote-unquote fiscal cliff scenario. And while it makes for great cliche, the fact of the matter is we went over the fiscal cliff long ago. None of these proposals that are being bantied back and forth are even remotely going to do anything to resolve our problems. In fact, in the case of some analysis, these proposals, the one particularly by the president, would actually result in even more spending on top of even more taxes. Which, I thought it was the spending stupid. $4.71 in new tax increases for $1 in spending cuts. So for that $3.71 in additional revenues, where's that money going to go? It's going to go on new spending. It's going to be to fund all of those things that Congress is so great at using euphemisms to make it appear as though something is happening when in fact it's not. We need serious people, not just in Washington, not just in our state houses. We need serious people out here in the grassroots who are willing to step into the fray and to, metaphorically speaking, grab our representatives by the collar and shake them silly until such time they understand that it's time to get serious. We are long past time to be continuing to play these ridiculous games and kabuki theater instead of doing the right thing that will benefit the future of America and our children. News Busted is next. We'll be back on the other side of the break. Stick with us as we round third and head towards home. You're listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative